In 2009, Zimbabwe printed a $100 trillion bill. It was worth 40 cents on the black market. This is how a country destroyed its own money. It took 10 years, a printing press, and terrible decisions. To understand it, you have to go back to 1980. On April 18, 1980, Zimbabwe declared independence from Britain. The country launched a brand new currency, the Zimbabwean dollar. One Zimbabwean dollar bought $1.47 US cents. The Zimbabwean dollar was stronger than the American dollar. Zimbabwe was known across the region as the breadbasket of Africa. The country exported tobacco, corn, and food across the entire continent. White commercial farmers ran highly productive land across the country. The economy was stable, and the currency held its value. Nobody looking at Zimbabwe in 1980 would have predicted what was coming. Then, in 1998, everything began to unravel. In August 1998, President Mugabe made a fateful decision. He deployed approximately 11,000 troops to the Democratic Republic of Congo. Zimbabwe backed Laurent Kabila in the Second Congo War. The intervention sent men and money thousands of miles away from home. Finance Minister Makoni acknowledged a cost of over $200 million. Some estimates put the burn rate at $1 million per day. $1 million a day for someone else's war. The intervention rapidly drained Zimbabwe's hard currency reserves. The IMF responded by withholding $53 million in balance of payments support. Military analysts said equipment losses added another $73 million on top. The Congo War became a key trigger of Zimbabwe's fiscal collapse. The money was running out. The second blow came just 2 years later, in February 2000. Mugabe proposed a constitutional referendum on land reform. The new constitution would let the government seize farms without compensation. Zimbabwean voters went to the polls and rejected it. The voters said no. Mugabe ignored the vote and backed the farm seizures anyway. He backed so-called war veterans who began invading white-owned farms. The farm invasions turned violent. Farmers were beaten, some killed. More than 4,000 farms were seized from white commercial farmers. Out of 4,500 white commercial farmers, most lost everything. These farms were the productive backbone of Zimbabwe's entire economy. Without experienced farmers, food production collapsed almost overnight. Export earnings vanished, and tax revenues dried up almost at once. The breadbasket of Africa was empty. The government now had no tax base and no international support. In 2020, Zimbabwe signed a $3.5 billion compensation deal. But the first payments only came in 2024, decades too late. Total food production fell 60% over the following decade. 60% of Zimbabwe's food production, gone. Commercial farmland lost 3/4 of its aggregate value. That happened in a single year. 2000 to 2001. That one-year loss exceeded all World Bank aid to Zimbabwe by $5.3 billion. More than all World Bank aid to Zimbabwe since independence. More than all the aid wiped out in 1 year. About 700 companies shut down by end of 2001. Industrial production dropped 10.5% in 2001, 17.5% in 2002. Export earnings collapsed as Zimbabwe lost its foreign currency income. Without foreign exchange, imports dried up across the board. Shortages of food, fuel, and medicine spread across the country. Shortages everywhere. Food, fuel, medicine, nothing was spared. A functioning economy dismantled in just 2 years. GDP per capita fell from $1640 to $661 US. That's a 60% drop in average income per person. Average income? 60% of it gone. By 2007, 8 in 10 Zimbabweans had no formal employment. 80% unemployment, officially by 2007. The economy contracted at a rate of negative 6.09% annually. It was contracting at more than 6% every single year. In 2008, GDP per capita collapsed back to 1952 levels. Back to 1952. That's where the economy landed in 2008. That same year, a cholera outbreak swept through the country. Thousands were infected as the state failed to respond. The state had collapsed. There was no other word for it. Zimbabwe stopped reporting official inflation statistics after July 2008. The last official figure came out in July 2008. The official rate had already reached 231 million%. Official inflation rate, July 2008, 231 million% annually. 231 million% equal the official number. After July 2008, the Reserve Bank stopped publishing any data. Economists turned to black market exchange rates to track prices. Cato Institute method, black market rates combined with purchasing power parity estimates. Researchers at the Cato Institute calculated the true peak inflation. The true November 2008 peak dwarfed the official estimate entirely. 89.7 sextillion% per year. That's 89.7 followed by 21 zeros. 89.7 sextillion%, racking up every single year. In November 2008, prices were doubling every 24.7 hours. Price doubling time in November 2008, 24.7 hours. This ranked as the second worst hyperinflation ever recorded in history. The only country that ever ranked worse was Hungary. Hungary in 1946. The only inflation on record that was worse. Only Hungary was worse. And that was 1946. At the peak, prices doubled every single day, every 24.7 hours, a full doubling. Not every week, not every month, every day. The daily inflation rate hit 98%. Monthly inflation reached 79.6 billion%. 79.6 billion% per month. Zimbabweans didn't wait for their government to act. They simply stopped accepting their own currency. Informal dollarization. Before the government made it official, the population had already voted with their wallets. The market rejected the dollar before the state did. Now the government's response was to redenominate. 3 times they slashed zeros from the currency. First, in August 2006, 3 zeros removed. 1 new dollar replaced 1,000 old ones. But the printing press never stopped. Inflation came roaring back. The zeros were gone. The problem was not. Second redenomination, August 2008. 10 billion old dollars equaled exactly 1 new dollar. 10 zeros, erased overnight by a bureaucratic decree. And again, the press kept running. Inflation accelerated. Each redenomination brought only a brief reprieve before inflation resumed. Then came January 2009. A third redenomination, 1 trillion old dollars became 1 new dollar. 12 more zeros gone. 25 total across 3 rounds. 25 zeros removed. The press never stopped once. They were treating the symptom, not the disease. Removing zeros without stopping money printing changes nothing. Now, January 16, 2009. The Reserve Bank made history. They issued a $100 trillion note, the highest denomination ever legally issued by any central bank. It was legal tender from January to June 2009. 6 months. That was all it lasted. At the official exchange rate, it was worth $30. On the black market, 40 cents. The gap between those two numbers told the whole story. The official rate was fiction. The black market was reality. The formal monetary system had completely collapsed. Nobody wanted the Zimbabwean dollar anymore. Not the shopkeepers. Not the workers. Not the banks. A currency nobody trusts is just paper. The $100 trillion note couldn't even cover a bus fare. $100 trillion. Not enough for a ticket. That is what happens when trust in a currency is gone. Print enough money and the money means nothing. In April 2009, Zimbabwe officially stopped printing its own currency. The government adopted a basket of foreign currencies instead. The US dollar became the dominant currency in everyday life. Wages, debts, prices, all settled in money Zimbabwe could not print. The Zimbabwean dollar was formally demonetized in June 2015. A final exchange rate was set to close the books. 35 quadrillion old Zimbabwean dollars for $1. 35 quadrillion to 1. That is the final number. A number with 15 zeros after the 35. When the exchange opened, Zimbabweans lined up at the banks. They brought whatever savings they had managed to hold on to. One person walked in carrying 90 trillion Zimbabwe dollars. That was nearly a full $100 trillion note. The teller counted it and slid back 36 cents. 36 cents for $90 trillion. Not enough to cover bus fare home from the bank. That was reported from Harare in 2015. It was real. A lifetime of savings. Exchanged for less than $1. Not a crash. Just coins sliding across a counter. And yet those same notes have a strange second life today. The $100 trillion bill became a collector's item. Uncirculated notes now sell for $50 to $300. More than those notes ever bought anywhere in Zimbabwe. Artifacts of one of the worst monetary collapses in history. To understand the full story, we go back to 1999. The isolation did not just happen. It was triggered. In 1999, the IMF and World Bank cut off aid to Zimbabwe. They refused to fund Zimbabwe's military spending in the Congo. No international institution would finance a foreign military intervention. When aid stops, a fiscal gap still has to be filled. In 2002, the US and European Union imposed targeted sanctions. The targets were Mugabe himself and his circle of ministers. That same year, Zimbabwe was suspended from the Commonwealth. Every door closed. Every option gone. Zimbabwe lost all access to international capital markets. This happened precisely when its fiscal deficit was exploding. No IMF programs. No World Bank loans. No bond markets. A government with no revenue and no access to financing. There was only one tool left. The printing press, and so it printed, until the money meant nothing. Not because the government did not understand the consequences. By the mid-2000s, the damage was impossible to miss, but every other option had been eliminated. The lesson of Zimbabwe is not a complicated one. Printing money does not create wealth. It destroys the value of all the money that exists. Printing a bill is a hidden tax on all existing money. The more you print, the less each bill is worth. Print enough, and $100 trillion buys nothing. Zimbabwe began with a dollar stronger than the US dollar. It ended with 35 quadrillion of its dollars worth just one. That is the math of hyperinflation. That math is always brutal and always the same. The press is the lender that always charges too much. It always ends the same way. The money means nothing. The final act of a 10-year monetary suicide.